What would happen if Issei found Shirone, Koneko, and Kuroka when he was a child? What if Raynare didn't kill Issei? What would happen if Issei chose to save Rias from Razor Phoenix and defeated him? What if the greatest Sekiryyuuei of all time protected his school from Kokabiel, and both Rias and Sona fell in love with him? whenhe Nekomata Tale. Chapter 1 by Alan Lewis. This is a fanfiction dedicated to the anime High School DxD. Chapter 1. 12 years ago, Issei stood silently on the sidewalk watching his best friend, Irina Shido, climb into the back seat of her parents' car. Her father was being transferred to England because of his work. He was an official of the Protestant Church. Issei, of course, didn't understand any of this. He just knew that he was never going to see her again. Issei thought that Irina was a boy instead of a girl because they often roughhoused and explored the woods around Kuo town. They spent their time together trying to catch bugs, wrestling and wading in the creek behind the old school building, and watching the construction of the all-new private Academy, which was going to be an elite private school for girls. Irina was openly crying while waving goodbye as the car sped away. Issei tried very hard to not cry while waving back, because he believed that boys shouldn't cry. He wasn't succeeding because tears were freely flowing from eyes and dripping onto the ground. He watched until the car turned the corner and disappeared from his sight. His first grade class was going to be a lonely place when he was to start in a few weeks. On a whim, Issei decided to go back and visit his and Irina's old hideout. There was a small shelter that he and Irina built in the woods. It was a simple structure made from tree limbs and scraps of wood with a board for a roof that would keep the rain out. After a few minutes of walking, he found his hideout and discovered a kitten inside. The kitten was pure white with yellow eyes and looked like it was starving. Issei picked up the kitten, which was shivering, and cradled it against his chest. "I'm going to take you home with me, kitten," he said. "I will take care of you." The kitten looked into his eyes and saw gentleness and caring, and settled into his arms and started purring. By the time he got home, the kitten was fast asleep. Issei walked slowly so he didn't disturb the kitten as he walked. When he arrived at the back door, he kicked off his shoes and walked into the kitchen. Issei's mom was a kind woman and she doted on her only son. She was cutting up vegetables while preparing lunch. Miki Hyodo turned when she heard the door open. "Did you see your friend off this morning, Issei?" "Yes, Mom. But more importantly, I found a starving kitten in the woods. Can we keep it?" Mrs. Hyodo carefully picked up the starving kitten from Issei's arms and looked carefully. "Yes, we can keep her. We will take her to the veterinarian later, but right now she needs something to eat and drink." Mrs. Hyodo handed the kitten to Issei and took some dried fish and placed it in a bowl on the floor and poured some milk into another bowl. Then Issei rubbed the kitten's head to wake her, and after she yawned and stretched, he placed her on the floor to eat. Issei thought that he heard the kitten say, "Thank you for the food," and began to eat. She tried and failed to eat daintily as a proper kitten should, but she was too hungry. Issei sat on the floor and watched the kitten eat. After the kitten finished eating, she drank some of the milk, and after licking her paws she washed her face. She walked over to Issei after eating and climbed into his lap and fell asleep purring contentedly. "What are you going to name her, Eyes?" Miki Hyodo asked. Issei thought about it and finally said, "She is such a beautiful kitten and pure white. I think that I will name her Shirone." As soon as Issei said the name Shirone, the kitten opened up her eyes and looked at Issei's face, nodded and licked his hand. Then she promptly fell asleep again. "I think that she likes that name, Eyes," Miki said, "and somehow it fits her." Later, when it was time for bed, Issei was in his room putting on his pajamas, while Shirone was lying on his bed watching him. Then he heard the sound of a cat crying at the back door. Issei ran downstairs and opened the door to find a black cat that immediately walked inside. Unknown to Issei, Shirone had followed him and upon seeing the grown cat, walked over and butted heads with the black cat. Then the cat licked Shirone on the head and looked up at Eyes expectantly. "I guess that you are hungry too," Issei said. The black cat rubbed her head against Issei's leg, and after walking between his legs, she sat down in front of Shirone's bowl and looked up at Issei. Issei took the milk out of the refrigerator and poured some milk, but the cat didn't drink any, she just looked at Issei and waited. Mrs. Hyodo had walked into the room unnoticed and said, "Grown cats can't drink milk, Eyes, it gives them an upset stomach. Offer her some water and some of the leftover fish from dinner." Issei put some water in another bowl and put some fish in Shirone's food bowl. Again, Issei thought he heard, "Thank you for the food." But this time he thought he heard it from both cat and kitten in unison. Mickey looked at both cat and kitten that were sharing the fish and said in mock displeasure, "It looks like we have 2 cats now. What will you name the other cat?" The black cat turned and looked directly into Issei's eyes. Issei stood motionless for almost a minute staring back into the yellow eyes of the black cat. "Her name is Kuroka, Mom, and she is Shirone's sister." Mickey laughed and said, "Oh, how do you know this eyes?" "I don't know, Mom, I just know." Mrs. Hyodo placed her hand on her chin and said, "Perhaps they are cat spirits, nekomata, that have come to bless our home." And then she laughed, "But of course that is superstition." And laughed. Then Shirone did something that neither Issei or his mother ever saw before. She stood up on her back legs and reached out with her front paws toward Issei. Clearly, she wanted to be picked up. Issei picked Shirone up and she immediately climbed onto his shoulder and curled her tail around his neck and started to purr. Then, unseen to either Issei or his mother, she stuck her tongue out at Kuroka and deliberately turned away and softly licked Issei on the side of his neck. "Bedtime eyes," Mickey said. "Tomorrow we will take them to the vet." Issei climbed into bed and Shirone curled up next to Issei's head and gently curled her tail around his neck. Kuroka jumped up on the bed and walked up and licked Issei's hand, and then rubbing heads with Shirone she walked to the foot of the bed and went to sleep. Issei drifted off to sleep with the sound of the cat and kitten purring. He awoke once during the night and thought he saw a young girl under the covers with him and a naked teenage girl lying on top of the bed with her arm over the little girl. Issei blinked and saw that the kitten was under the covers with him and the cat was lying on top of the bed with her paw over the kitten protectively. "I must be dreaming," Issei said aloud and drifted back to sleep. Early the next morning Kuroka awakened Issei by tapping his face and meowing in his ear. Issei sat up and after rubbing his eyes, he said, "I suppose that you need to go outside to use the toilet." Kuroka and Shirone both jumped off the bed and headed down the stairs. Issei found them waiting patiently for Issei to open the door and let them out. Issei watched them run under the shrubbery and disappear. A few moments later Shirone came back out of the shrubs and walked back into the house, but Kuroka didn't. Issei waited for a few minutes and shrugged his shoulders and went back into the house to get dressed. Issei played with Shirone for a little while and then she jumped back onto Issei's bed and went to sleep. A little while later Issei's mom, Mickey, came to the door and said, "Come on Issei, we need to take the cats to the vet and pick up some cat food." Issei scratched his head and said, I let them out this morning but Kuroka didn't come back in." "Oh well, perhaps she will turn back up, but in the meantime let's take Shirone to the vet." Issei nodded and said, "Come on kitten, let's go get you checked up, okay?" Issei picked Shirone up and followed his mother downstairs. When they got in the car and started to drive away, Kuroka jumped on the hood and gave Mickey a disapproving look, as if to say, "Are you leaving without me?" Issei opened his door and Kuroka jumped off of the hood and then jumped into the car. Shirone was sitting on Issei's lap and stuck her tongue out at her sister, but Kuroka jumped onto the top of the headrest and looking down on Shirone, she licked Issei's cheek and turned away from her sister. Then she jumped into the back seat. Dr. Ishido pronounced both cats in good health and said that they were both underfed. Shirone was carried by Issei into and out of the vet's office but Kuroka just walked beside him, occasionally touching his leg with her tail. Neither cat was afraid of either the vet or the office. When they left the examining room and entered the lobby, a German shepherd was sitting next to its owner. It started barking but as soon as Kuroka hissed at him, the dog cowered under the chair and refused to move until Issei, his mom, and the cats left the office. The dog's owner looked in wonder at Kuroka and the veterinarian's receptionist remarked, "In all my years, I have never seen a dog so afraid of a cat." They stopped at the pet food store and Issei waited in the car with the cats while his mom went into the store to buy cat food. Shirone was lying on Issei's lap sleeping while Kuroka sat on the headrest and watched the people going in and out of the store. One man was walking his Great Dane which looked at Kuroka through the window and started barking. Again, Kuroka hissed and the dog took off down the sidewalk with his tail between his legs, dragging his owner by the leash. Issei looked at Kuroka and said, "You must be some terrifying cat to scare dogs like that." He wasn't expecting an answer but Kuroka said, "You have no idea boy, but I like you, and I think I will keep you." "You can talk?" Issei said in surprise. Yes, Shirone said from his lap, but don't tell anyone, okay? Issei looked at Kuroka and her eyes captivated him for a moment. Who would believe me if I did? Issei answered truthfully. Your secret is safe with me. We believe you, Eyes, you have an honest face. Shirone said. Can I call you Eyes? Yes, of course. Issei said, nice to meet you. We are in your care. Kuroka said, bowing her head. I think I will like living with you. Shirone looked at her sister and said, just remember, I found him first. Of course, but he has to grow up, whenhe. We can fight over him later, whenhe. Shirone curled her tail around Issei's wrist and said firmly, I won't lose big sister. Perhaps so, little sister, but there is always room for one more. I won't take him away from you, and when the time comes we will share him, whenhe. It is agreed, Kuroka, Shirone said, but I am first. Perhaps so, we will see, little one. The cats never spoke to Issei again, and after a while he decided that he had imagined it all. Shirone was a good kitten and always slept on Issei's bed, but Kuroka was more of a wild cat. She came to be fed and would play with Issei and her sister for a while, but wouldn't let anyone but Issei pet her. Nor would she let anyone pick her up, not even Issei had that privilege. She would jump on his lap or lie beside him on occasion, and allow herself to be petted by him, but no one else. And so the years passed. Whenever Issei left the house, Kuroka and Shirone would walk beside him, one on each side, as if they were his escorts and bodyguards. When he was at recess at school, or playing sports, later as he grew, they would watch from a distance. They were always watching over him. Ch 1 of 20 next, Chapter 2, A Nekomata Tale Chapter 2. 12 years ago Kuroka was sitting in a tree watching Issei through the window of his elementary school classroom. Issei was sitting by the window and he was trying to pay attention in class, but occasionally he would be distracted by something outside and look out of the window. He did not see Kuroka because she did not wish to be seen. After a few minutes Shirone joined her on the branch. And she too gazed at Issei. Shirone was already falling deeply in love with Issei even though it had only been a few months. She spent hours sitting in his lap while he studied at his desk at home. Unlike most humans, Issei was very kind, and she felt a great power sleeping within him. She didn't know what that power was, but it was wild and untamed like her sister Kuroka. Shirone also felt a curse with the power, and while he studied she poured senjutsu into him using her kai to search for the curse. Kuroka spent more time indoors as she got used to the Hyodo household. Miki Hyodo was a kind woman, and after some time she would rub up against Miki's leg and Miki would stop what she was doing and bend down and stroke Kuroka's jet black fur. Good morning, Kuroka, she would say, would you like a treat this morning? In addition to cat food, Miki bought dried sardines as treats for the cats. Then she would stop what she was doing and go get a sardine out of the bag in the pantry and offer it to Kuroka. Shirone would occasionally sit on Miki's lap when she sat outside watching Issei play. Miki would pull a sardine out of her pocket and give it to Shirone, who would daintily eat it in her lap. Kuroka would always rub her head against Miki and thanks and go find a corner or hiding place to eat it. Goru was a salaryman who worked long hours supporting his family, but he would always take time to play with Issei on his days off. And he too would occasionally pet the cats and give them treats. Often Goru would fall asleep watching TV in the living room out of exhaustion. Miki worried about her husband, thinking that he was working himself to death. Shirone would sometimes rub up against his leg while he slept and using senjutsu heal his exhaustion and boost his vitality and luck. Both Shirone and Kuroka were grateful that they had found a home, and they kept the mice and other pests away. Before finding a home she was very worried about her sister and had even considered an invitation for a pact with a devil in a village far away from Kuo town. She and Shirone were traveling across the country looking for a place to belong. They happened to find the hideout of Issei Hyodo and Irina Shido. Shirone was starving and exhausted. They were chased out of their village and were constantly on the move. Then that kind human boy found her sister and they finally found a place to belong. Shirone stared at Issei while sitting on the branch with her sister and said, he is definitely the one. He has a dragon sleeping within him and he will give me strong children when he is matured. Our family will no longer be the least of our clan. I agree, little sister, Kuroka said, he will give us strong children. You are being selfish again. I love him, you know, Shirone said. I know, little one, I have fallen for him as well. But what do you think will happen when we show our true form to him? Will he become afraid and run away, or reject us because we are cat demons? I don't know Kuroka, but I do not think so. Aside from the dragon sleeping inside, he has great courage and a desire to protect everyone he cares for. Look how he befriended those two fools he calls his friends, and he took us in. When we spoke to him he didn't become afraid, he was just surprised. Yes, little one, he has great potential. We must awaken his power little by little and pour magical power and ability into him, but first, we must find some way to remove his curse. He is too weak right now to withstand the curse and the temptation of the dragon. Yes, about that. What kind of dragon sleeps within him? Shirone asked. I do not know Shirone, but it is very powerful. It may be one of the two sky dragons of legend. Do you think so? That makes me fear for his life. We can't let him awaken that power before the curse is gone, or he will drown in its power and die after killing everything around him. That includes us, dear sister. Kuroka said, do you think either of us could stand a chance against his power if it is turned against us? No, I know that there are very few beings that can stand against someone that drowns in the power of a dragon. It is decided then. Tonight when he sleeps we will find out which dragon sleeps within him, and then we will find a way to release its curse. Later, while the house slept, the two nekomata changed to their true forms. One a 16-year-old beautiful human-looking girl with 2 tails and a 4-year-old child with 1 tail. They both had cat ears and sharp teeth. They went into the bathroom and rinsed each other with water and performed a purification ritual. Then Kuroka cast a spell on the house to ensure that no one awoke until they were finished. Then they went into Issei's bedroom and pulled back the bed covers. Then they gently removed Issei's clothes and Kuroka picked Issei up and cradled him in her arms and knelt on the floor. Then she held him lovingly against her chest, his face between her breasts. Then Shirone knelt in front of Kuroka and hugged him from behind, her bare breasts against his back. Then they both, using their kai, they dove into Issei's consciousness. They went through his memories, both good and bad, his joys and sadness, his courage and fear. Deep in his subconscious they found a red aura. It was the aura of the dragon. They touched the dragon's mind and found anger, hatred, pain and regret, but those emotions were not the emotions of the dragon. They were the shadows of former hosts that drowned in the dragon's power. They were lined up in rows, sitting and not speaking. They just kept chanting, "Juggernaut Drive," over and over. They kept searching through the past possessors, and then they found the spirit of a woman who was different than all of the others. She wasn't chanting and her mind just held sadness and regret. The girl was only 18 when she died and was trapped within the aura of the dragon. Kuroka spoke to the girl. "Hello. Nice to meet you. I am Kuroka of the least clan of Nekomata. Can you tell me your name?" The girl focused on Kuroka and Shirone and said, "I am Elsha." Then she said, "You are not a wielder of Diedrich. How did you find this place?" Kuroka said, "We are trying to lift a curse from a young boy whom we love. We only see death, destruction and sadness in his future, and we have bound ourselves to him." Then Shirone spoke, "We see sadness and regret in you. We only see anger, death and despair from the other souls here. What is this place?" Then another voice interrupted. It was powerful and ancient. "I am Diedrich the Welsh dragon. This place is a sacred gear that has my soul sealed. People fated to possess me do not have happy lives. Long ago I started a fight with my rival Albion the Vanishing Dragon. Our battle took place in the middle of a war between the 3 great powers of Christianity, God and his angels, Satan and his devils, and Azazel and his fallen angels, that had earlier split from God. Our battle was so fierce that it threatened to destroy this dimension and this world. The 3 great powers called a truce to battle us. Many from all 3 sides died fighting against us, but in the end we were defeated and our bodies were destroyed while our souls and powers were sealed in sacred gears. Humans are born into this world who are possessed by our sacred gears, and upon awakening our powers they battle each other, drowning in rage that destroys their life force as they activate Juggernaut Drive in order to defeat each other. Our battle was stupid and our curses have been placed upon everyone born with our sacred gear sealed inside. Unfortunately, the young boy you love is soon going to suffer the same fate." Then Elsha spoke, "The possessors of Diedrich and Albion do not live happy lives. And we usually die young. We are but shadows of our past souls trapped forever within this hell of our own making within Diedrich's consciousness. We all yearn to be free of this curse. But for that to happen this current possessor must break the curse for all of our sake. For my sake also, Diedrich said, I grow weary of the endless cycle of death and destruction. But once my power becomes known to my possessor, they seek more and more of it until it seduces them and they destroy themselves. What if Elsha spoke for you, Diedrich? Shirone asked. Perhaps when he begins to awaken his power, we nekomata and Elsha can guide him to the path of protection rather than destruction. That is a good plan, Diedrich said enthusiastically. Will you agree to train the new Sekiryyuuei Elsha? Yes, Diedrich, with all my heart I will work hard to train Issei Hyodo to the path of protection. Then Diedrich said to Kuroka and Shirone, you nekomata have the power to purify spirits, can you also suppress them? Yes, with your permission, we will put every former possessor except Elsha to sleep. Diedrich and Elsha both nodded and Kuroka, Shirone and Elsha took hands and concentrated. Kuroka and Shirone put all of their kai onto one spell that was blessed by Diedrich and acknowledged by Elsha, who said, I will aid with whatever power you require. Then all four said in unison, sleep. Without exception every soul pf the past possessors other than Elsa fell into a dreamless sleep. The chanting stopped and their tortured faces relaxed into peaceful expressions. The next morning Miki Hyodo found her son on the floor naked. The two cats were nestled against his chest. They were also asleep. Wake up, eyes. It is time for school, she said, but Issei didn't move. She touched his forehead and felt a fever. Then she gently moved the two cats who also didn't awaken and placed him in bed and dressed him. Then she covered him up and after thinking about it for a moment she picked up each cat and placed them on the bed. It was the first time anyone had ever picked up Kuroka. But Kuroka only briefly opened her eyes and she snuggled up against Issei and went back to sleep. Shirone awoke long enough to crawl under the covers and turned around placing her chin on Issei's neck and went back to sleep. Miki kissed Issei on the forehead and closed the door behind her as she left the room. I will check on him later, if his fever doesn't go down or if he doesn't wake up soon I will take him to the doctor. He must have had many bad dreams to have taken off his clothes and ended up on the floor, she said to herself, but the cats were good kitties and kept him warm. Previous ch2 of 20 Next, Chapter 3 A Nekomata Tale Chapter 3. 5 years ago Issei awoke and realized that both cats were not in his room. After he dressed for school he found a note on his desk. It was written in perfect hiragana with a quill pen. The letters were perfect and beautiful. The note was a work of art in calligraphy. The note read, Thank you for caring for us for these past years. It is time for us to reveal our true nature to you. We both love you and we want to be with you always. Your life is in danger and we wish to not only protect you but allow you to protect not only us, but everyone you care about. We will be waiting where you first found my dear sister when she was cold and starving. We will be waiting for you. Kuroka Issei pondered the letter and decided that it was not a joke. He had been dreaming every night for years that he was training to be a dragon. In his dream, he could fly, breath fire and fire magical energy while wearing red armor. In his dream, he was being encouraged and trained by a beautiful blonde-haired woman and both Kuroka and Shirone watched over him, and he could feel them pour magical energy into him. Issei dressed and quietly left the house. It took him a few minutes to reach his old hideout, but now it was hidden in a thick mist. He felt pressure that he knew unconsciously was meant to keep uninvited guests away, and to keep what was hidden in the mist secret. He heard a voice from his dream that he recognized. The voice of the blonde woman, Come Sekiryyuuei. It is time to embrace your destiny. Issei walked through the mist and instead of finding his old shelter, he found what looked like an ancient shrine. There was a low stone wall with cat statues on the four corners. There was a red torii with a European red dragon engraved between the upper and lower lintel of the gate. The shrine itself was made from cut stone and there was a red silk curtain covering the entrance of the shrine. Issei walked through the torii and the pressure immediately ceased. A hand reached up and opened the curtain and pulled it aside. The hand belonged to the blonde woman who beckoned him inside. She bowed and said, Come Hyodo Issei of the Sekiryyuuei. It is time for us to meet. Issei went into the shrine and bowed. The young woman was wearing a red kimono and she turned and gestured to Kuroka and Shirone, who were sitting on cushions inside the shrine. Before his eyes both cats transformed. Shirone became a young girl only a year younger than himself, and Kuroka became a young woman. Kuroka was wearing a black kimono and Shirone was wearing a white kimono. Both girls had prominent cat ears and cat eyes. They both smiled and bowed. Issei saw that Kuroka had 2 tails and Shirone had 1 tail. "Nice to meet you, Issei," Kuroka said. "Shirone and I are yokai. We are nekomata from the least family of yokai." Then she gestured to the blonde woman and said, "And this one is Elsha." Issei said, "I see you in my dreams. I am glad to meet you in person." Elsha said, "I am but the memory of a girl that was the strongest female Sekiryyuuei of all time. You will only be able to see me in this space." "What is a Sekiryyuuei? You called me that before and I do not know what that is." Then a voice spoke from his left hand, and he saw in his mind a tremendous red dragon speaking the words, "I am Diedrich Gachi. I am the Welsh dragon and one of the twin sky dragons. I am the Sekiryyuuei, the red dragon emperor, and you also, as the one who possesses me, is also the Sekiryyuuei." Issei was silent for a moment and said, "Nice to meet you, Diedrich." Then Elsha said, "It is time to begin your training for real, Issei. You have trained in your subconsciousness for years, now you must train with your physical body. I want you to put on your gauntlet." "How?" Issei asked. "Put out your left arm and concentrate your power." Issei did as he was asked, and to his surprise a red gauntlet appeared over his hand and forearm. There was a green jewel in the back of his palm. The gauntlet was made out of red metal and resembled a dragon arm, hand and claw. Elsha said, "Just think about this power and it will appear again. It is called boosted gear, and it will double your power every few seconds when you say the word, boost. Try it." "Boost." Issei felt stronger. "Boost," he said again. Then Kuroka said, "This temple is in a separate space from our world. It is where you will train your body and mind to handle your sacred gear." "Sacred gear?" Issei asked. "Yes, my spirit is held within the sacred gear called boosted gear," Diedrich answered. "It is one of the 12 Longinus tools that can destroy even gods. There are 2 more forms of my sacred gear, scale mail, which is the balance breaker, and another form which I will not name, because it will destroy you if you ever activate it." "It is a cursed form," Elsha said sadly. "When activated, it destroys the possessor of Diedrich by using up our life force." "It is the curse of the Sekiryyuuei," Kuroka said, "a curse that we are going to help you lift." "You can train in this space, Issei," Elsha said. "Think of it as another dimension. It is actually bigger on the inside than the outside. In here you can learn to fly, and you can learn to fight." Issei looked and realized that he was standing on a hill with a green valley spread out before him. There were mountains in the distance. He turned and looked another direction and he saw a beach leading to an ocean that filled the horizon. "This is where you will train," said Elsha, "and first you are going to learn how to fight." "Who am I going to fight?" Issei asked. "Me," Shirone said. "Me," Kuroka said. "Me," Elsha said. "And eventually me," Diedrich said. "First you are going to learn close combat, karate and boxing," said Shirone. "Then you are going to learn senjutsu and tuki," said Kuroka. "How to use scale mail and fire dragon shot," said Elsha. "And how to fly and breathe fire," said Diedrich. "When are we going to start?" Issei asked. "Now," said Shirone and punched Issei in the stomach. "You need to learn to block and counter-strike." For the next hour Issei trained with Shirone. Little by little he began to pick up on her moves and was able to block some of her strikes, and he even managed to kick her in the face once. Kuroka burst out laughing as her sister was knocked on her ass. Shirone stood up and bowed. "Very good, eyes, let's stop for now." For the next month Issei learned karate and kickboxing. Every day after school Issei and the 2 cats left his house and walked into the woods. As soon as they entered the training space within the shrine, Shirone and her sister would transform to their nekomata forms and Elsha would appear. Then one day after an hour of kickboxing, Elsha said, "Try to balance break, Issei. Say this and concentrate on its form, visualizing it in your mind. Balance break, scale mail. Balance break, scale mail," Issei shouted. And he was immediately clad in red armor that resembled a dragon. There was even a tail coming out of the back of the armor. "Now try to fire a dragon shot, boost your power and throw it. Boost. Boost. Boost, fire," Issei said. Then a ray of power shot from his hand and disappeared into the distance. Then Issei's armor disappeared and he fell to the ground exhausted. Shirone ran to Issei and held him. "Are you all right, Issei?" she asked. "Yes," Issei said and lost consciousness. When Issei awoke he found himself lying on the ground with his head in Kuroka's lap. Shirone was sitting beside them while she held his hand. Issei sat up and Shirone reached over and kissed him. "That was a splendid first try," she said happily. Then Kuroka kissed him as well, and she said, "Soon, you will be the greatest Sekiryyuuei of all time." Issei trained daily for months, and the months turned into year. On Sundays he would run as fast as he could for hours at a time. His stamina built up to where he could maintain his balance breaker all day without effort. He would also fly for long periods of time while randomly firing dragon shots or breathing out flames. The rest of the week he fought. He mastered kickboxing and karate, and he even started learning spells that Kuroka taught him. He grew stronger, but all of his training was in secret. He studied hard and even managed to transfer into Kuo Academy when it became co-ed. His friends Motohama and Matsuda also joined the school, but he had grown distant from them. He immersed himself in study while in school, and during physical education class he would run laps or lift weights. He was a loner that didn't get close to anyone. He felt the burden of his destiny as the Red Dragon Emperor, and he was determined to break the curse that Elsha warned him about. Rias Gremory had a problem. Rias was the most beautiful girl in school with long flowing crimson-red hair that hung past her knees. She was having lunch with her friends Akeno Hamejima and Sona Shitori. These three girls were the most popular girls in school, and Sona was the student council president. Rias was the president of a new club called the Occult Research Club, but it really wasn't much of a club because there were only 3 members. Herself, Akeno, and a second-year boy named Kiba Yuto. Rias and Akeno were third-year students. The 3 girls were watching the sports field from the second-floor window of the old school building. That entire building was the headquarters of the Occult Research Club, and some of the students wondered why they had the entire building to themselves. The rumor was that Rias's parents were on the school board, and their influence allowed their daughter to have the building for her new club. It certainly looked creepy enough. There was just enough of a scary air about the building that kept the other students away. They would have been surprised to see how immaculately clean it was on the inside compared to its worn-down exterior. The old school building wasn't the problem on Rias' mind. The problem was the fact that her club only had 3 members. The truth was that Akeno, Sona, and Rias were all devils from the underworld, and the Occult Research Club was actually made out of Rias' peerage or family. The school charter required that there be at least 4 members for a club to continue, and Rias only had 3 members of her club. Rias was the president, Akeno was vice president, and Kiba was the secretary. Sona could not join the orc because she was the student council president, and what wasn't known was that the student council was all made up of Sona's peerage. "You are going to have to find someone, Rias," Sona said, sipping her tea. "There must be someone that you can let join your club, even if you don't make him or her into your servant." "You're right, of course, Sona, but who?" "I don't know, but you are going to have to choose someone." Sona glanced out the window and noticed a second-year student who was by himself. She peered at him for several seconds and took off her glasses to stare at him. She felt a power inside him, an immense power. A power that would not only solve Rias' club problem, but also her other problem. A problem that they didn't speak of. Rias was engaged to someone she absolutely despised. Razor Phoenix was an arrogant playboy, but as the 3rd son of the Phoenix family, he was a good political choice for an arranged marriage between the House of Phoenix and the House of Gremory. Rias Gremory was determined to marry for love, not for a title. She wanted someone who wanted Rias as herself, not as the heiress of a noble family. Rias was a princess, but she was also a girl with her own hopes and dreams. Sona pointed the boy out to Rias. "What about him?" Rias and Akeno both went to the window and looked at the boy that Sona pointed out. "Who is he?" Rias asked. Sona thought for a moment and finally said, "His name is Hyodo Issei." Akeno said, "He mostly keeps to himself and he doesn't have many friends, but there is something about him. He is dangerous." "Perhaps he is," Rias said, "but dangerous to whom?" "I don't know, Rias. I certainly don't find any malice in his aura. Just power and something that wants to dominate, or is it to protect?" "I really don't know," Akeno said finally. "We should watch him for a few days, Rias," Sona said. "If you approach it right, he may be able to solve both of your problems." And she thought to herself, perhaps mine as well. "Okay, Sona, I will take your advice. I will have my familiar watch him." First, previous ch 3 of 20 next, Chapter 4 A Nekomata Tale Chapter 4. Issei Hyodo was standing on the pedestrian bridge over the highway, lost in thought. He was getting stronger and he could feel Didraig's power surging through him. He was also starting to have romantic feelings and sexual desire for both Kuroka and Shirone. It was very hard to see them as ordinary cats that slept on his bed with him when he saw their nekomata form when they practiced karate and senjutsu. More than once he saw a bare breast or even their vaginas when they fought. They didn't deliberately expose themselves to him, but they also didn't hide their femininity from him either. He was idly wondering if he should try to kiss one of them when his thoughts were interrupted. "Excuse me, are you Hyodo Issei?" Issei turned and saw a very beautiful girl standing before him. She was wearing an unfamiliar school uniform and her long black hair hung to her waist. Issei nodded and the girl continued, "My name is Amano Yuma, and—" The girl turned red and bowed slightly. "I want you to be my boyfriend." Issei stared at the girl for a few seconds. She was indeed beautiful, but the years of learning senjutsu allowed him to read someone's aura, and he could sense deception and hostility behind her smile. He also sensed pure naked evil and lust for power. He knew that this girl was not who she said she was, but he also knew that he shouldn't start a fight with whoever or whatever she was on a crowded bridge over a busy highway. Issei bowed and said, "Please excuse me, miss, but I am very busy lately, and I am not looking for a girlfriend right now. Thank you for thinking about me though." The girl Amano Yuna's expression changed immediately. She turned white in rage and muttered under her breath, "You are going to regret turning me down, boy," and turned and stomped away. Issei watched her until he was lost in the crowd and walked home, whistling a random tune that popped in his head. He thought that he could feel someone watching him, but whoever it was staying well out of sight and trying very hard to hide their presence. No, Issei thought, more than one presence was watching him. There were two somethings watching him. One was definitely hostile and the other was concerned, or was it merely curious? Issei changed direction and instead of heading to the video arcade as planned, he decided to go to the shrine. Issei believed that whatever was following him could not enter his secret space, and he could ask Elsha's advice about whatever was following him. Whatever they were not human. Issei continued walking and soon he was back near Kuo Academy and went into the woods. He quickly darted behind a tree and waited. He could sense that something, or rather, somethings were there. But he couldn't see anything. Issei sighed and continued his walk. As soon as he entered the mist around the shrine, the presences he felt disappeared. As he thought, nothing uninvited could enter. Issei entered the shrine through the gate and was immediately transported to the other space. He found Elsha sitting on the ground, leaning up against an enormous tree watching the sunset. Issei sat beside her and leaned up against the tree as well. Before Issei could speak, Elsha said, "It is really beautiful, her eyes. I am glad that I can be in this space, Issei." Issei momentarily forgot about being followed and also watched the sunset for a few minutes. Elsha reached over and squeezed his hand. "I am jealous of Kuroka and Shirone, you know," she said. "Oh. Yes. They can leave here and go home with you. I can only physically manifest in this space. Whenever you are anywhere else, I can only watch you from within the sacred gear." Then Elsha paused. "They love you, Issei. Kuroka and Shirone both love you deeply, and I am jealous." "Why?" Issei asked. "Well, to tell you the truth, I also love you, Issei. I told you once before that we possessors of Didraig never lived happy lives. We, me included, were too interested in gaining power to enjoy life. I never took a lover, Issei. I was too drunk with my own power to see men as anything but something weak that needed to be dominated and destroyed if they got in my way. But you are different. You only want to protect life. You, despite awakening your power at such a young age, never once hurt or tried to take advantage of anyone. That is an admirable trait, and it is incredibly rare in people who wield power. Thank you, Elsha. That really means a lot to me, but you know that it is because of you, Kuroka and Shirone. You are kind and patient with me." "You are wrong, Issei Hyodo. It is your kindness and gentleness that has affected us. Nekomata are wild yokai that take what they want and use people for their own purposes, and I was a battle maniac that preferred power over everything else. But you tamed the wild yokai, and you tamed this battle maniac. That is why we all love you. You are genuinely a good man, Issei Hyodo." "I don't know what to say," Issei said, looking into Elsha's eyes. "Don't say anything, instead. Make love to me." And then Elsha grabbed him in a fierce hug and kissed him. Issei was surprised and at first he wanted to resist, but in the end, he wanted her just as much as she wanted him. "To tell you the truth, Elsha, I love you too." Is it wrong to love a ghost, Issei? That doesn't matter. All that matters is this moment. I want to make love to you as well, but I have to warn you. I am a virgin and I never even kissed a girl before. Elsha laughed. It was a happy musical laugh. That makes me happy, Issei. You are the first boy that I have ever kissed before and I don't know how to make love either, but people have been figuring out how for thousands of years. Let's give it our best effort. They embraced and kissed and then they began helping each other undress. Elsha unbuttoned Issei's shirt and unzipped his pants. Issei untied Elsha's kimono and opened it up. Elsha wore a simple loincloth and no bra. Issei wore boxer shorts, but soon they were both naked and making love with passion and care under a gradually darkening sky. Unnoticed, Kuroka and Shirone crept into the shrine and upon entering the other space they saw Issei and Elsha in the throes of passion. They both sat down and watched. Neither wanted to interrupt them but also neither wanted to turn away and not watch. After they finished, Issei and Elsha cuddled together as their passion ebbed and their skin became chilled in the night air. Finally Issei noticed Shirone and Kuroka sitting a little bit away from them, still in their cat forms. Issei became embarrassed and started to get dressed while Elsha just smiled at both of them and winked, as if to say, "I betted him first." Shirone and Kuroka silently acknowledged Elsha's victory and they both transformed to their nekomata forms, but this time they were both naked. Kuroka clasped her hands behind her head and arched her back. "No need to be embarrassed, Issei. We have slept in your bed for years and we have already seen you naked while you grew up. You are a man now, and although Elsha was first, I will not lose to her. You will be my lover as well, my dear Issei." "We are agreed, dear sister," Shirone said shyly. "We will share you, Issei, and we all love you." Elsha smiled and then said sadly, "I am but a ghost and even though I seem real in this world, I died long ago. I will never know the joys of motherhood and I will not get to grow old with the man I love. But know this, Issei Hyodo. I will be waiting on the other side for you. I will love you. Always." And then Elsha faded away. The last thing that Issei ever heard from her was, "At last I have no regret. I have finally known love." Issei reached for her while she faded but it was like trying to grasp the wind. "I will never forget you, Elsha," Issei said while openly weeping. Shirone and Kuroka came to Issei then. There was no lust in any of them. They just huddled together for a long time while they also mourned Elsha's departure. Finally, wordlessly Issei pulled away and stood up to dress. "We have to go home now," he said. "Yes, my love," Kuroka said. "We will go home now. And when you are ready, my sister and I will be happy to share our bodies with you. For now we will mourn with you." Then both of the nekomata sisters stood up and changed their appearance to that of human girls. Shirone again appeared to be just a year younger than Issei and Kuroka as a young woman. They were wearing contemporary clothes and they walked hand in hand out of the temple and through the mist. Rias familiar watched the exchange between Issei and the girl Amano Yuma. She was a bat familiar that could take the form of a young woman. She narrowed her eyes when she looked at Yuma because she could sense that this girl was not human, and in fact she was a fallen angel. She followed Issei until he entered a barrier in the woods that she could not penetrate. She could tell that the barrier was a safe space for Issei and was not worried. But she also knew that Issei was also being followed by the fallen angel. She knew that the fallen angel did not detect her. In her arrogance, the fallen did not even try to notice if there was any other presences. She was a mid-level fallen and she could kill Rias's familiar, but she really wasn't a danger to her master, Rias, who was a high-class devil with considerable, if imperfect, power of destruction. She could totally annihilate anything or anyone with a lesser power. Her power of destruction was great, but it was nothing compared to the power of her older brother, Sirzex, who among even high-class devils was a transcendent being. It was his power and leadership that ended the Devil's Civil War after the end of the War of the Three Great Powers. He, along with his wife and queen, Graphia Lucifuge, Serafal Citri, Ajuka Astaroth, and Fabian Glasia Labilis, put down the old Satan faction that wished to continue fighting against the angels and fallen angels. Sirzex, Serafal, Ajuka, and Fabian became the four Mao who ruled the devils, not by birthright but by the results of their power and leadership. They abandoned their family titles and took on the names of the Mao that were defeated and killed in the Great War: Circex Lucifer, Seraphol Leviathan, Ajuka Beelzebub, and Fabian Asmodeus. Rias, due to her older brother becoming Mao, became the heir to the Gremory family as the second child of Zeoticus and Venelana Gremory. Rias loved Japanese culture, and spent most of her teenage years living in Japan, hiding in plain sight along with her best friend Sona Citri, who went by the surname Shitori. Sona also happened to be the younger sister of the Mao, Seraphol Leviathan. Together they ruled the territory of Japan where Kuo Town existed. Via small magic circle, Rias' familiar, Shinku, Scarlet, informed her master of the presence of the fallen that was following Issei. And Rias in turn informed her friend Sona. Sona, a fallen angel, has penetrated our territory and made contact with Issei Hyodo. According to Shinku, she assumed the form of a human and tried to ask him for a date. She possibly wanted to get him alone and reveal herself to him, but he turned him down. She became furious and immediately followed him until he entered a barrier. When she could not get past the barrier, she became more furious and teleported away. I fear that she intends to harm him. Sona asked, "A barrier?" "Yes. Apparently there is a barrier around an area behind my base, that I wasn't aware of until now. It isn't made by devil magic. I am unfamiliar what kind of barrier it is, but my queen Akeno believes that it was made by yokai." Interesting, so Hyodo is familiar with yokai. There is certainly more to him than meets the eye. Yes, Sona, but more importantly, I fear for Hyodo's safety. If there is one fallen angel in our territory, there is bound to be more. Just because the Governor-General sued for peace, that doesn't mean that all fallen are satisfied. Agreed Rias, my sister has heard rumors that Kokabiel may be causing problems behind the scenes. Yes, Sona, Rias replied thoughtfully. I will inform the Devil King about our suspicions, but in the meantime we need to watch Hyodo full time until the fallen angels make their move. Okay Rias, we are in agreement. I will have Tsubaki go immediately to the Hyodo house and take the first watch. She paused and then smiled, and Rias, it is okay for you to call Circex by his first name. He is your big brother after all. Yes Sona, and your sister cosplays as a magical girl despite being one of the four Mao. But we still must follow decorum in matters that affect our territory and the human world. Sona laughed bitterly and said, okay, you got me Rias. Let me contact my queen. Goodbye, and closed the conversational magic circle. Then she immediately contacted her queen, Tsubaki Shinra, who was also the vice president of the student council at Kuo Academy. Tsubaki, go to the Hyodo house and introduce yourself to his parents. There is a fallen stalking Hyodo Issei. Tell them that he is requested by the student council to appear in our office tomorrow morning and stay there until he gets home. Shinku, Rias familiar as shadowing Hyodo. Inform me when he gets home and we and the Gremory peerage will guard Hyodo and his family until the fallen angels make their move. First, previous ch4 of 20 next, Chapter 5 A Nekomata Tale Chapter 5. Raynare was furious. She was a mid-level fallen angel and she was both proud and very vain about her appearance. She had been given orders to follow a certain human by Azazel and to determine if he possessed a sacred gear, and if so, to find out what type of sacred gear he possessed. Raynare decided that the best way to find out would be to pose as a human girl and to ask him out on a date. It was simply too much of a bother to capture the human, so she decided to simply murder him after toying with him for a few hours. She had it all planned out. She picked the name Yuma because she was going to murder him at sunset on the day of their date. Raynare saw the human and because he didn't look very attractive she decided that he was a virgin and she even thought about taking his virginity and just as he climaxed, she would stab him in the heart. But instead this human, this repulsive insect, had the audacity to reject her. She wasn't just going to simply murder him, she was going to torture him. She would skin him alive and take great effort to prolong his agony as much as possible. She was going to rip off his fingernails and gouge out his eyes. She was going to chop him into little pieces and then after dumping what was left of his corpse, she was going to murder his whole family. Raynare stomped away in wrath, and waited until there wasn't any witnesses and transformed into her fallen angel form and flew into the sky. Then she hid her presence and started following Issei Hyodo. She was being patient, she was savoring her plan for revenge and thinking about how much she would enjoy murdering this filthy human. No, she decided, she wouldn't just murder him. First she would rape him and then humiliate him. She would bring his desire to a fever pitch and then start to torture him just before he climaxed. His desire would turn to fear and pain. Raynare was getting aroused just thinking about her new plan. Yes, that was the best. She would use him as a sex toy and then torture him. She would make him die in regret and despair. As soon as Issei entered the woods, Raynare felt resistance. There was a barrier on the woods. No, there were two barriers. One was a barrier made by those accursed beings known as devils. Raynare knew that she was operating within a territory controlled by devils, and she was very careful to hide her presence from the devils that she knew hid within this town. The first barrier was around the base of operations for the devils, but there was a second barrier hidden within the first, a barrier created by beings that she was not familiar with. This barrier was made by yokai, spirits of Japanese folklore, and it was hidden even from the devils. Raynare could not pass the first barrier without alerting the devils in this town, and she certainly could not enter the second barrier. Raynare wasn't about to get involved with the devils, not by herself, and she certainly wasn't going to antagonize the yokai that were an unknown quantity. Raynare teleported away. She would go to his house tonight, capture her prey, and then force him to watch as she murdered his family. Then she would rape, torture and then murder him. She could hardly wait. Miki Hyodo was surprised when she answered the doorbell. A young girl bowed when she opened the door. She had never seen the girl before, but she was wearing a Kuo Academy uniform. She was a beautiful young girl wearing glasses and long straight hair. Good afternoon, my name is Tsubaki Shinra and I am the vice president of the student council at Kuo Academy. Are you perhaps the mother of Hyodo Issei? Yes, but my son isn't home right now. Is he in some kind of trouble at school? No, he isn't in any trouble. He is in fact a model student. I was merely sent by President Citri to convey her wishes for Hyodo to come to the student council's office tomorrow. She wishes to speak to him personally. Issei should be home soon. Would you like to come inside and wait for him? I just made some tea. Yes, Tsubaki said, thank you. I will be in your care. Mrs. Hyodo invited Tsubaki inside and said, please make yourself comfortable. And then bowing she went to the kitchen to get the teapot and cups. This was the first time that one of Issei's schoolmates had ever been to her house, and for her son's sake, she wished to make a good impression on the young woman. She decided to use the good cups, and setting the cups and teapot on a silver platter, she returned to the living room to find Tsubaki sitting on the couch waiting for her. Miki sat the tea service on the coffee table, and poured 2 cups of green tea. So tell me how my son is doing in school. Raynare waited until she felt Issei's presence reappear from the barrier, and she teleported into the sky above Issei's house. She watched as he walked down the street holding hands with a young girl and a young woman. Both the girl and woman were very beautiful, and Raynare became angry. So, he rejected me because he already planned to meet with someone else. I will make them all pay. Raynare said out loud and immediately created a spear of light and threw it at the young girl. Shirone didn't realize her danger until it was almost too late and tried to dodge. Instead of killing her, the spear struck Shirone in the shoulder and knocked her to the ground. The spear ripped into her shoulder and chest, pinning her to the ground. Shirone screamed in pain. Kuroka ran to her sister, and Issei looked up to see Raynare staring down at them, her eyes filled with hate. Shirone was alive, but she was gravely injured. Protect Shirone, Kuroka, Issei said quietly. And then he yelled at Raynare. How dare you attack what is mine? I am going to kill you. Raynare laughed in scorn. Really, boy? I am the fallen angel, Raynare. What can you do against me? Just this. Issei yelled. Balance break. Issei transformed. He was immediately covered in red armor and dragon wings sprouted from his back. Issei flew into the air directly at Raynare. She created a spear of light and threw it down, but Issei merely punched it away without flinching. There was no thought of technique, he was just filled with rage. Before Raynare could react, Issei reached her and grabbed her by one of her wings and threw her to the ground. Raynare crashed into the road directly in front of Issei's house, making a crater in the ground. Raynare's wing was broken, but she was still ready to fight. What the hell are you? She yelled at Issei. I am Issei Hyodo, the Sekiryyuuei, and I am your enemy. Raynare turned and summoning a spear of light she threw it at Issei's house. Then watch your family die. There was a loud explosion as the house was destroyed. Mom! Issei yelled in horror. Raynare stood up creating another spear of light. "I have killed your family and now I am going to kill you," she said. "You surprised me once but it won't happen again." Issei said, "You are wrong. You are going to die." Then Issei took a deep breath and exhaled fire. Before Raynare could do anything she was burned to ash. Issei then landed on the ground beside Kuroka and fell to his knees crying. His armor disappeared and he was just a boy lost in grief. Kuroka reached out and grabbed Issei, hugging both him and Shirone. Shirone opened her eyes and reached out to touch Issei on the face. The three of them huddled together. Issei turned and looked at what was left of his house and saw his mother running towards him. She was alive. Issei didn't understand how, but she was still alive. Miki Hyodo was sitting on the couch in the living room. The young girl Shinra Tsubaki was sitting next to her. The couch faced the living room window and the window was open to let a fresh breeze into the house. Miki saw Issei walking up the street holding hands with a woman and a girl that she didn't recognize. The girl had short white hair and the young woman had long black hair. She was about to speak when she saw what looked like lightning flash to the ground, striking the young girl. The girl was pinned to the ground by what looked like a glowing spear. Miki saw the woman run to the girl and she saw her son look up, and then to her amazement he was suddenly wearing bright red armor and what looked like bat wings appeared on his back. Then he leapt into the air. Miki dropped her cup which crashed to the floor as she ran to the window. Then she saw something slam into the road, making a crater where it fell. Something sat up and in the crater and then she saw it turn and then she was pulled to the floor by the girl who she had completely forgotten about. The girl threw herself on top of Miki and then her house exploded around her. Miki was lying in a crater where her house once stood. The young girl, Tsubaki Shinra, was lying on top of her. To her amazement she was uninjured. Even her clothes were unscathed despite the fact that her house was gone. The young girl was unconscious but she was uninjured. Miki pushed the girl aside and ran into the street screaming. It was too much. She was frightened out of her mind and she was running on instinct. Suddenly her son was there, and he grabbed her in a fierce hug. It was too much for her. Miki Hyodo collapsed in her son's arms and fell unconscious. Issei was sitting on the ground crying. His house was destroyed, and his mother was unconscious, lying on the ground with her head in his lap, and Shirone was badly injured. Issei's father was away on a business trip, and he simply did not know what to do. Kuroka was holding her sister in her lap, silently using healing magic while leaning against Issei. It was her own fault, she thought. She didn't react until it was too late and now her sister was hurt and she didn't protect the boy that she loved. They were both lost in their own grief and they didn't notice when they were approached by a girl with long crimson hair. The girl knelt on the ground next to Issei and said, "This isn't your fault, Issei Hyodo, if anything, it is mine, but I will make it up to you. Sleep now." Both Issei and Kuroka fell into a deed sleep and they didn't know or care when a magic circle appeared under them and teleported them away to another space. When Issei awoke, he was lying on a huge bed in an unfamiliar room. He had been bathed and changed while he slept. He was now wearing silk pajamas and he saw a beautiful gray-haired woman wearing a French-made uniform standing at the foot of his bed. When she noticed that he had awoken, she bowed politely and said, "There are clean clothes hanging in the wardrobe to your left. When you have finished dressing, you will come downstairs for breakfast. I will be waiting just outside. I am the maid Grafia, and for now, I am at your service." Then Issei remembered the battle. Shirone lying on the ground bleeding to death while Kuroka was trying to heal her terrible wound with Senjutsu. He remembered the horror of seeing his house exploding and then his mom collapsing in his arms, somehow alive. Before he could speak, the maid Grafia interrupted his thoughts. "Your mother and your companions are well cared for. The young nekomata has been fully healed and she is resting in another room along with her sister. Your mother is asleep in a room across the hall and you may go in and see her if you wish." Grafia paused. "My master's only request is that you wait until you meet with him for breakfast before you visit your mother and your companions." Then Grafia bowed and left the room, closing the door softly behind her. While Grafia was talking, Issei concentrated his Senjutsu. He found no lies or malice in her words, but he felt immense power in her aura, more power than he had ever felt before. Whoever this maid was, she was definitely someone who commanded respect. If she is only the maid, what kind of power did her master possess? And more importantly, where was he? He could tell by the flow of his Kai that he was not on Earth. He was in a different world. It was like his training space, but this world was much larger and there were many unfamiliar beings all around him. They weren't hostile, they were just on standby? After Grafia left the room, Issei climbed out of the huge bed. It was the largest bed that he had ever seen. It was a canopy bed and was easily twice as big as a standard king-sized bed, and the room itself was nearly as large as the first floor of his entire house. The room only had the one bed, a massive fireplace on one wall, a dresser and a wardrobe on the opposite wall, and a large window with silk curtains. Issei went to the window and saw a huge lawn, an orchard and flower gardens. There were mountains off in the distance and he was on the third or fourth floor of an immense building. The only thing different was the sky. It was purple. Issei turned away from the window and faced the bed. There was a life-sized picture of a young man with red hair and a beard holding hands with a young woman with brown hair. Standing between them was a young girl who appeared to be only 2 years old with red hair. The portrait was an oil painting, but it was very lifelike. It looked almost like a photograph. Issei turned from the window and went over to the wardrobe to find a very expensive-looking suit and shirt hanging on a hook on the front of the wardrobe. The suit was black and white pinstriped and the shirt was white. They were all made of silk. On top of the dresser was Issei's boxer shorts, newly washed, and black socks. Next to the socks was a box containing highly polished black dress shoes, and a crimson-colored silk tie. Clearly, these clothes were meant for Issei, but he had never worn formal attire in his life. Issei had expected the clothes to fit, but he was pleasantly surprised to find that not only did they fit, they were tailor-made to his exact measurements. Issei dressed quickly, but he couldn't tie his tie. He had never worn one other than the clip-on tie that he wore to his middle school graduation ceremony, and this was not a clip-on tie. Not knowing what else to do, he buttoned the shirt, and put on the jacket, and then he carefully folded the tie and placed it back on the dresser. Then after putting on the shoes that also fit perfectly, he put on the jacket and opened the door. When he opened the door, he found Grafia standing just beyond. She turned, bowed and smiled, then she frowned slightly and said, "Where is your tie, young master?" Issei bowed and said, "Please excuse me, I have never worn a tie before." "Come with me then, and I will show you how to properly wear a tie." Grafia led Issei back into the room and asked Issei to remove the jacket. Then she hung the jacket back on the hanger and picked the tie up off of the dresser. "Allow me to show you. This is called the four-handed knot. It is suitable for all formal occasions." Then she expertly tied the tie, and upon completion, she took the jacket and helped Issei put it on. "Follow me, my master is waiting." Grafia led Issei down a long hallway to a grand staircase. Then she led him down 2 flights of stairs to another hallway with a double doorway at the end of the hall. There were 2 maids, one on each side of the doors, and they opened the doors as Issei and Grafia approached. They both bowed wordlessly as Grafia led Issei through the doorway and closed the doors behind them. Inside was a very large dining room with seating for 50 people. Instead, there were 3 people seated at the head of the table with a 4th and 5th place setting. There were maids behind 4 of the 5 chairs. Issei immediately recognized the man at the head of the table. He was the man in the painting in the bedroom. To his right sat the woman also from the painting, clearly his wife, and to his left sat a young woman. She was the young girl from the painting, but she was now a young woman, perhaps 18 years old. When Issei entered the room, they all rose and bowed. Then the man at the head of the table spoke. "Nice to meet you, Hyodo Issei. My name is Zeoticus Gremory. This is my wife Venelana, and this is my daughter Rias. I am sure you have many questions which will be answered presently. Please sit down. Breakfast will be served as soon as my son arrives." Issei was directed to sit directly across from the young woman Rias. He thought that he recognized her, and finally he realized that he had seen her at his own school. She was his upperclassman, and one of the 2 idols of his school. Rias smiled at him and said, "Nice to finally meet you, Hyodo Issei." "Nice to meet all of you," Issei said, bowing deeply. He had suddenly realized that he was among royalty. This wasn't just a big house or a mansion. He was in an ancient castle, and this man Zeoticus was a king of his domain. Then Issei stammered in embarrassment, "Your Majesty," he said finally. All of these people were incredibly powerful, even Rias, who he recognized from his school. He could sense their power through their aura, but there was no hostility, only concern and friendship. Zeoticus laughed and said, "Be at ease, Hyodo Issei. I am no king, although I am what you might call a lord. Please sit down and have breakfast." Zeodicus sat, but Venelana and Rias remained standing. Issei quickly took the hint and sat as well. The maid behind him only slightly pushed the chair to the table as Issei sat. Then Venelana and Rias also sat. Grafia walked from beside Issei to stand behind Zeodicus. She nodded and a maid standing by a different door opened the door and 3 men dressed as chefs entered through the doorway and brought 3 silver platters. One platter held meats and cheeses, another held breads and rolls and the third held different kinds of fruit. 2 maids followed carrying pitchers of juice, and a silver platter holding both a pot of coffee and a pot of green tea. They were all sat on the table and after the chefs departed, the maids picked up the plates and began serving the dishes. The maid behind Issei asked, "What would you prefer? We have beef, bacon, and fowl and we have both sweet breads and savory breads with butter, strawberries, blueberries, grapes and apples and coffee or tea. We can also serve you eggs if you prefer." "What about my mother and my friends?" Issei said bowing. "I mean no disrespect but why aren't they here?" The door at the end of the room opened and another man entered, a tall man with long red hair and wearing an elaborate robe over his suit. Everyone at the table stood and all of the maids knelt and bowed. Then Zeodicus, Venelana and Rias also knelt and bowed. Issei automatically copied them and he also bowed. The man sighed slightly and said, "Father, Mother, Rias, I have told you not to bow when we are in private. Please sit." The tall man walked over and seated himself next to Rias' chair and everyone stood and allowed themselves to be seated by the maids, and the maid Grafia went and stood behind the newcomer. Another maid entered from the kitchen and stood behind Zeodicus. Issei sat and the tall man in the robe looked at him. "Your mother and companions will join us after we talk. I have a proposition for you Hyodo Issei. My name is Sirzex, may I call you Issei?" First, previous ch 5 of 20 next, Chapter 6 A Nekomata Tale Chapter 6. "Nice to meet you Sirzex, yes please call me Issei." Then he paused for a minute. This person was obviously the one with the one in charge. Zeodicus and Venelana were by his own admission, his father and mother, and Rias was his sister, yet they all knelt and bowed to him. Therefore he was their lord. If Zeodicus was a lord that would make Sirzex what? A warlord, or an emperor perhaps. No, they didn't display Japanese culture, despite speaking the language perfectly. They displayed a European culture, perhaps French, or German, or even British. Therefore Sirzex was the king of whatever domain this was. Issei had been learning English in school since middle school. So he decided to respond in English. "Yes, I am Issei Hyodo. I am honored to meet you, Your Majesty." Then Issei paused again. "I appreciate your hospitality, but I really do not know why I am here, and where exactly I am. What I do know, is that last night while walking home I was suddenly attacked by something that wasn't human. She nearly killed my friend Shirone without warning and when she couldn't easily attack me, she destroyed my house. Therefore I killed her. She called herself the fallen angel Raynare when she attacked me but she also called herself Yuma when she, for whatever reason, asked me out on a date earlier in the day. Raynare or Yuma was my enemy and I killed her. She wasn't human and she wasn't yokai. She was something that I had never seen before. You all despite human appearance, are also not human. I don't think you are my enemy. But I, my mother, Kuroka, and Shirone was transferred here without our knowledge or consent and I haven't seen them since I woke up this morning. Why are we here? Are we your prisoners?" "No, you aren't prisoners. My dear sister Rias transported you here because she was concerned for you," Sirzex replied in English. Then he switched to Chinese and said, "Rias felt responsible for your misfortune because she believes that she was slow to act when a fallen angel penetrated your town." Then switching back to Japanese he said, "Kuo Academy as well as Kuo Prefecture is a territory in the human world that she is responsible for." Then Rias stood up and walked around the table to where she was standing beside Issei. Then she knelt, and then bowed with both her palms and forehead touching the floor. "Please forgive me Lord Hyodo. I didn't anticipate that you would be so suddenly attacked by a fallen angel." Then she started crying. "I am so sorry Lord Hyodo. Please find it in your heart to forgive this foolish girl." Issei stood and then knelt. He reached out and took one of Rias' hands and said, "There is nothing to forgive. You didn't do anything wrong and your family has shown me and my family with kindness. Thank you for your hospitality, and please call me Eyes." All of my friends call me Eyes and I have a feeling that we can become friends. Okay Eyes, in that case please call me Rias. Then Rias stood and smiled. It was the most beautiful smile that Issei had ever seen. Then Rias bowed to her brother and returned to her seat on the other side of the table. After she and Issei returned to their chairs, Shirzek said, "You are correct, Issei of the Sekiryyuuei, we are not humans. We are devils and I am the Mao, the king of the devils. Although these are my family, I gave up the Gremory name long ago. I am Shirzek's Lucifer and I have a proposition for you, a choice if you will. But before I give you the choice I need to give you a little background information. A very long time ago there were two races of supernatural beings. There was God and his angels and there was the race of devils. We were at enmity with one another but there was no open hostility. Then a great number of angels fell from the grace of their God because they were seduced by the race of man and by their own power. Then there were three races: devils, angels and fallen angels. Eventually there was a great war and most of the devils, angels, and fallen angels were killed in our war. In the middle of the battle, the two most powerful dragons on earth started a battle of their own. Their battle was so fierce that if it had continued all life on earth would have perished. So we devils, the fallen angels, and angels called a truce and combined our remaining forces to defeat and destroy the two dragons. When they were killed their souls were sealed and placed in sacred gears. After we defeated the dragons, our truce became a peace that has lasted for thousands of years, but in the battle we lost Lucifer and the other three Mao. Those names were given to me and three others. For better or worse I am the Mao Lucifer and I do not wish for war. I only want peace, both with the other two powers and with the dragon Diedrig. Then Diedrig spoke from the jewel that appeared on Issei's hand. It has been a long time Shirzek since I was in the underworld. It is nice to finally meet the new Mao. I do not wish to fight with you. My battle is only with the white one. Albion. Issei said, he is the other dragon that Elsha told me about. The vanishing dragon. Yes, the Sekiryyuuei, said Shirzek. It is nice to meet you Diedrig. Then Shirzek paused and then spoke to Issei. But the Sekiryyuuei is not your only enemy. As the Sekiryyuuei you will draw other strong enemies. And now you can count the fallen angels among your enemies. Even though you possess Diedrig you are only human. I would like to offer you a chance to be something else. What is that? Issei asked although he already knew the answer. Rias answered. Become one of my servants, a devil of the Gremory group. You will be well cared for and compensated. And if I refuse? You will be returned to the human world with your memory intact. Your mother and your two yokai companions will remember nothing from the time after your house was destroyed. But your house will be rebuilt and you will stay in a hotel until it is completed. I will not force you to become my servant, but if you refuse, I cannot guarantee your safety, or the safety of your family. I do not know if more fallen angels will attack you, but there are fallen angels who are more powerful than the one that attacked you, and you or your family members can be targeted. And if I accept, then I will guarantee the safety of your family Issei, Shirzek said. Furthermore I will assign someone who will train you so that you will become the most powerful Sekiryyuuei in history, and as a bonus you will have a lifespan of thousands of years, and you can choose one or both of your yokai to become devils as well, if they agree. You have great potential and I foresee you becoming a high-class devil yourself very soon. And anyone you bring to Rias' peerage while her servant will follow you when you get your own peerage. What do you mean by peerage? After the Great War the devil race was severely decimated. We designed a system whereby humans and other beings can become devils with the attributes of chess pieces and each high-class devil gets 13 chess pieces, 1 queen, which is the most powerful of the servants, 2 bishops, 2 rooks, 2 knights and 8 pawns. Bishops specialize in support, both long-range and short-range attacks and healing the other members of the peerage. Rooks specialize in strength, and knights specialize in speed. Pawns are foot soldiers but they can with permission of the king promote to knights, bishops and queens. They are both the least powerful but potentially the most powerful and diverse members of a peerage. In chess pawns are the most expendable pieces. Issei said dryly, why would anyone choose to be a pawn? No one is expendable in my family, and my peerage is my family. Rias said. Whatever you become if you accept my offer, you will be cherished as my family. Exactly how many members are in your peerage? I have 1 queen, 1 bishop and 1 knight, so you can become a bishop, a rook or a knight, depending on your potential. Which would you want to be? If I were to choose, I would pick being a rook, but it can't just be my decision. It has to be something that my mother, my father, Kuroka and Shirone would agree to. Unfortunately, that decision must be your own, Issei said. Your nekomata companions are welcome to join Rias peerage if they chose, once your decision has been made, and they will be offered the same choice that you have been given. They will be free to choose yes or no, just like you, and if you chose to say yes, they will join Rias peerage with the understanding that they will be yours once you become a high-class devil yourself. If they chose no, then they can remain your friends and companions as long as they live. If they chose to do so, your parents can either be told of your new identity or not. That is your decision alone, but they simply do not have enough potential to become devils themselves. They will, however, be well cared for and guarded for the rest of their lives. That I guarantee and swear to you, as the Devil King. So this is the temptation of a devil? Issei said. Think of it more as a negotiation. Rias said. In the best negotiation, a win for both parties is the best outcome. I want this to be a win-win. For both of us. Then she paused. What is your decision? Issei sighed. I'm sorry, but I am going to have to decline your offer. You are asking me to make a decision that affects the people that I love without allowing me to consult them. The answer is no. Send me and my family home. Very well. Issei said. I am responsible for my sister's actions. She took you here without your permission, and for that I am sorry. Your house will be restored and you and your companions are free to go. First, previous ch 6 of 20. Next, Chapter 7 A Nekomata Tale. Chapter 7. Rias sighed audibly when Issei rejected her brother's ultimatum, and it was an ultimatum. Issei expected the Sekiryyuuei to make a decision that affected his life without asking for advice from those closest to him. She looked at her mother with pleading eyes, hoping that she would intercede on her behalf. Finally whenhe spoke. I acknowledge you as Mao, my son, but I believe that you are making a mistake by forcing this decision as a one-time offer. Give Hyodo Issei more time to decide, and allow him to consult with those he loves. After all, this is a decision that will affect all of their lives. Issei bowed his head and said, Yes, I am the Mao, but I am not so much of a fool to ignore my mother's advice. Hyodo Issei, no, Lord Sekiryyuuei, you can take as much time as you wish to make that decision. Furthermore, I will allow you to consult with your companions and tell them of our existence if you wish. To be truthful, I was hoping that you would reject my first offer. It was an ultimatum and I was testing to see if you would make a rash decision under pressure. I am pleased to know that you have passed my test. Then he turned to the maid standing beside his chair. Greifia, please escort the Sekiryyuuei to his family's rooms and assist him with anything he needs. Greifia bowed and said, As you command, my lord. And then she turned and said, Please follow me, Lord Sekiryyuuei. Issei was surprised at the turn of events. He wasn't quite sure that he could trust Issei, but he decided that he liked whenhe very much. She had interceded on his behalf and he was grateful for that. Issei excused himself from the table and said, I do not intend to hide anything from Kuroka and Shirone. They have been with me since I was a child and they have helped me train. I am going to tell them everything that has transpired and ask their opinion on whether we should accept your offer at this time. I am also going to ask their opinion on what exactly I should tell my parents, especially my mother who saw and experienced the attack from that fallen angel. Rias also stood up and said, Excuse me, Lord Sekiryyuuei. Everything that happened to you happened in my territory. I would like to personally apologize to your mother and your companions. And then she bowed and said, Please. Yes, you can come, Lady Rias, but please call me Eyes. All of my friends call me Eyes. In that case, please just call me Rias. After all, we attend the same school and I very much would like to be your friend. Together they followed Greifia out of the dining room and out into the hall. The maid standing by opened and closed the door behind them and bowed as they passed. Greifia led them back up the stairs, and once they reached the hallway where Issei's temporary room was, she turned and said, Your mother is in the room adjacent to yours and your two companions are across the hall. Currently they are all still under the sleep spell that Lady Rias placed them under before transporting all of you to the underworld. The young nekomata is now fully healed and they are in the same room. Who would you like to see first? I want to see my mother first. Issei said. When will she wake up? The spell on all of them will be lifted as soon as you open the door to their rooms. I will stand by in the hallway in case you need me, and the Lady Rias will stay by my side unless you wish her to accompany you. Issei looked first at Rias and then at Greifia, Grafia was clearly the maid, but her suggestion seemed more like a command, as if the maid was telling her lady what to do. There was a very interesting dynamic going on. Issei could sense that the maid was more powerful than Rias. In fact, after he thought about it, this maid had more power than even Rias' parents had. There was an interesting dynamic going on in this house. The oldest son was the Mao, and had greater power than anyone else in the room. Grafia the maid was next in terms of power, then Zeoticus and Venelana, and finally Rias, who was also powerful, just not as powerful as her parents or her older brother. I might as well kick over the anthill now. Issei said to himself and said, "Tell me, Rias, why does your maid have more demonic power than you or your parents?" Grafia blushed, and Rias unexpectedly burst out laughing. "Wow, Issei, nothing gets past you. You have a very sharp mind." Grafia likes to fulfill her role as the chief maid of the Gremory household, but she just happens to be my brother's wife, and queen. Queen? Issei asked. Yes, queen. Remember how high-class devils have peerage based on chess pieces? Grafia is my brother's queen, and she is known as the strongest queen in the underworld. In fact, my older brother's peerage is the most powerful peerage in the underworld. How would you rate your peerage, Rias? It was Rias' turn to be embarrassed, and she turned a deep shade of red at Issei's question. To be truthful, I don't know. I only have my queen, one bishop and one knight. I haven't found anyone else that I wanted to join my peerage yet, that is until I found you. Issei let the unasked question hang in the air and deliberately changed the subject. Grafia was a very refined and elegant woman, and if she wanted to fulfill her chosen role as a maid, who was Issei to question her motive? Please excuse me for asking that question, Lady Grafia. Thank you for your kindness. Then he bowed and opened the door to the room. This room was also large, but it wasn't quite as large as the room that he had been given. There was a single queen-sized bed, a dresser and a wardrobe. There was also a fireplace across from the one window, but no portrait hanging on the wall. Issei thought about the picture in his room. It was a picture of Rias and her parents. Then Issei realized something. He had been sleeping in Rias' bed, in her bedroom. Now it was Issei who was embarrassed. He had never slept in a girl's bed before. Well, he did sleep with 2 girls every night since he was in preschool, but that didn't count, because they were always in their cat forms when they slept with him. Or did it? Until the day before he had been a virgin, and he had given his virginity to Elsha, and now she was gone. He hadn't even considered having sex with Kuroka and Shirone until that very moment, and then he had another thought. He smelled Rias' perfume in the room where he slept, but so much had gone on until that very moment, he didn't really notice, and after he thought about it, he smelled her perfume on himself. Was it because he had slept in her bed, or was it because she had slept with him in her bed? Despite himself, that thought gave him a slight nosebleed and an erection. He decided that the best course of action was to pretend that he didn't realize that he had slept in her bed. He did decide that he would introduce his mother to Rias and Grafia, so he turned slightly and asked, "Could both of you accompany me?" Issei thought that the best way to explain what happened would be to tell his mother that Rias had found them and brought them to her house after their house was destroyed. But then, how would he explain the sky being purple? He wasn't sure if he should tell his mother that they were in the underworld. He would just have to keep her away from the window and hope that she didn't notice. But then, how would he explain the castle and the maids everywhere? There was nothing like that in Kuo Prefecture. His mother would know that. Furthermore, she probably saw him in his armor, and she did see her house destroyed her around her. Should he keep her asleep and pretend their house was destroyed because of some accident? No, Issei had never lied to his parents. He kept Kuroka's and Shirone's secret because it never really needed to be revealed before. But this, he couldn't just lie to her. Miki Hyodo was a very strong woman, and she deserved to be told the truth. He went into the room and sat on the bed. Then he beckoned Rias and Grafia to come and stand next to the bed, and then he gently called her. "Mom, wake up." Miki Hyodo awoke with a start. She was having a nightmare where her son had turned into a dragon and her house had exploded around her. She kept running to her son, but the faster she ran, the farther away he was. She could feel the heat and smell the smoke, and then she caught fire and was burning. Then the dream was over. She was lying in a bed in an unfamiliar room, and her beloved son was sitting next to her. It had all been a dream, but no, what happened was real. She remembered the flash, the explosion, and running to her son, who was back to normal. She looked around and noticed the young girl with long crimson-colored hair and the gray-haired woman dressed in a maid uniform. They both bowed when she saw them and she automatically bowed her head in response. Then Miki reached up and embraced her son with tears welling up in her eyes. She was safe and he was safe. That was the most important thing. Issei, I'm glad you're safe. I'm glad you're safe too, Mom. Then the crimson-haired woman bowed again and said, I am truly sorry about your house, Mrs. Hyodo. My family is going to have it rebuilt for you. It was my responsibility to keep everyone safe and it was my failure that caused your loss. Miki turned to her son and asked, what is she talking about? I saw something throw something at our house before it exploded, but before that you changed. Miki's voice trailed off. Issei cleared his throat and scratched his head. It was going to be difficult to tell his mother the truth, but that was exactly what he needed to do. Mother, our house was destroyed by an evil creature called a fallen angel. You mean like in the Christian Bible? Yes, Mother, her name was Raynare. She attacked Shirone, and so I attacked her in return. She attacked your cat? No, I saw something hit a young girl that was holding hands with you. Well, remember when you said that Kuroka was a nekomata? Well, she is, and so is Shirone. Wait, our cats are yokai for real? You must be joking, eyes. This is getting too complicated. What happened to our house? Issei told her. It took a while, but he told her everything and held nothing back, except Elsha. He wasn't about to tell his mother that he lost his virginity by having sex with a ghost. He told her about Diedrich, the Red Dragon Emperor, and even demonstrated by wearing his armor. He told her about how Kuroka and Shirone revealed themselves to him in the car on the way home from the veterinarian's office. He told her that he had trained for hours every day, in order to protect everyone he loved and his desire to use his power as the Sekiryyuuei for good. Then he introduced his mother to Diedrich. Mom, this is my partner. The jewel appeared on his hand and a voice came from the jewel and said, nice to meet you. I am Diedrich the Welsh Dragon. I am at your service. Everything was too hard to believe, but Miki could not disbelieve her own eyes and ears. She bowed towards the jewel and said, I am Hyodo Miki. I am Hyodo Issei's mother. Nice to meet you, Diedrich. Then Issei held his hand out towards the two women who were still standing silently while Issei told his story. This is my friend Rias Gremory. She is my senior at school, and this is Grafia. She is a maid for Rias' family. We are in Rias' home. She brought us here after our house was destroyed and she saw to it that Shirone was treated for her injuries. Isn't she afraid that what did you call it? What if that fallen angel comes back? Will it attack here? No, Mother, she will never attack anyone again. The fallen angel Raynare will never attack anyone again. I killed her. That one statement was the one thing that shocked Miki Hyodo the most. Her gentle son who had never harmed anyone or anything in his life had just admitted to murder. You killed her? Yes, Mom. She tried to kill Shirone and then she tried to kill you and destroyed our home, my home. No one will ever harm anything that belongs to me and avoid my wrath. I am the Red Dragon Emperor and I will destroy anyone who harms who I love, and what is mine. Issei's voice changed when he said that. It was a deeper voice and she heard the voice simultaneously coming from her son and the jewel on his hand. Issei was a dragon, and for a moment Miki Hyodo was afraid of her own son. But no, he was still her son and he had never done anything to cause her to doubt him or fear him. He was still her son and she loved him. Finally she spoke. I am glad that you are safe, my dear son, and I am glad that we are all safe. If you killed that fallen angel, I am sure that she deserved death. Then she turned to Rias and said, thank you for bringing us into your home and taking care of us. We are in your debt. And then she bowed again. Then Rias said, no, it is my fault that the fallen angel was in Kuo Prefecture and running loose. I should have known that she was there and stopped her before she hurt anyone. Miki looked at the young girl before speaking and finally said, what could you have done to stop such a creature? Rias decided to reveal everything since Issei had told his mother about the existence of fallen angels. I could have killed her myself. No, I should have killed her when she attacked the young nekomata, but I didn't arrive in time. I am the Princess Rias Gremory, and I am a devil. First, previous ch 7 of 20 next.